Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. I'm an ordinary guy with ordinary tools making extraordinary items. I'm a self-taught craftsman, an amateur blacksmith, and a novice woodworker. Each week I take on a new project. I show you my perspective, I show you my process. I don't edit out any of my mistakes. I don't edit out any of my aha moments. The items that I make each week tend to be fantastical in nature, tend to be whimsical, echoing a time of a forgotten yore, if you will. Items like novelties, weapons and armor, furniture, practical items that I use on my ranch here in Colorado. This week, it's the week before Christmas, I'm going to make a meat cleaver. I have kept a decent track, and to my records, virtually all of my family members and extended family members and my closest of friends have all received something that I have built over the years, with the exception of 3 people. So I'm going to surprise one of them. Actually, I'm going to surprise more than one of them, but for this build, I'm going to surprise one in particular with a meat cleaver in the average Jonathan format, which is a mix of traditional and my own way of looking at things and my own way of expressing things. It's going to be an interesting build. It's going to combine several things that I like to do. I look forward to sharing with you this process. Let's get to the shop and get started. I almost always do several sketches, probably sometimes upwards of 10, maybe even 15 sketches of what I would like the product that I'm going to make to look like before I land on the final shape and the final design. So this is the final design that I landed on that I'm sketching out here, and I'm just going to make measurements to what I want it to actually measure out to be. The ingot or the bar stock that I'm using to make this out of is actually a really thick piece of bar stock for me. I don't normally try to move metal that is that thick, but I'm going to go ahead and try it. I wanted to try to use my forge, so I welded on a piece of rebar as a handle and lit up the forge and got that sucker nice and hot. And this big hammer, I made this big hammer several years ago. I love it. I'm very proud of it. It's about 6 pounds. It's ludicrously heavy. And now I'm trying to cool off the rebar before it overheats itself, and I was using snow. Totally didn't work. So now I'm using water. That worked a little bit better. And now I moved the red hot piece of steel out, and I'm going to work it for the next 15-20 minutes using that heavy hammer. I'll tell you what, my arm gave out very fast. I don't do enough blacksmithing and using the hammer, especially one that hot, for my arm to have that much muscle memory and structure and dexterity. These are the pieces of wood that I'm going to use. I've used these before in other videos. The purple is tiger maple. That is the actual color of the wood. I love it. The brown is ironwood, also an extremely dense, very, very heavy, beautiful brown wood. And then holly is the white wood. I'll tell you what, at first I thought I was going to be embarrassed that it took me so long to move this metal and to get it shaped, and I'm not embarrassed at all. I'm not a weak person by any stretch, but I just could not handle that 6-pound hammer for that long. It really broke me into pieces. But I took several days at it to get this thing shaped to the shape that I wanted it to be, but ultimately it did work out. I am using a slightly smaller hammer to get a little bit more shaping blows done. And as you can see here on day 2, it's starting to take the basic shape, but it's still extremely thick. Ultimately, this item remained at least 3/8 of an inch thick, which I'm totally fine with, but it's in my style, it's in my design aesthetic, but it is a very thick cleaver. I'm going to go ahead and segment the wood on this handle. It's going to have a little bit of maybe like a coral snake look to it, just slightly, but it ultimately it's going to come down to however the viewer, however Nick sees it, what he sees in it. I am really not the best with glue of any sort. This took several iterations, several tries, but ultimately it worked out great. I'm going to cut it down the middle once I get it to being ready. Day number 3 on the hammer and the anvil, and this is really about as close to the final shape as I needed it to be. Now with the smaller hammer, I am tapering down where the edge will be. I'm thinning it out at the edge so that it's not just a giant cluster of metal. And as you're going to see with my final design, I leave a lot of scale, a lot of black rime on my weapons, on my blades. I like the way it looks. I will polish off the areas that I want to look shiny, but that's very often. I want it to be smooth, but I like that earthen, antiquated look as if you pulled it out of a crypt that very day. Now 24 hours has passed, and I'm going to go ahead and cut this segmented glued wood right down the middle to make it the two halves of the handle. Now over to the metal bin to grab what will ultimately be the handle. This is an old strap off of an old wagon. It's probably tool steel in composition, so it's actually really hard. I did not need to quench it. I don't need it to be extremely hard. The blade is what really needs to be the hardest. Slowly but surely making little adjustments in it so that it fits directly on that handle really nice and well. If you look underneath, you'll see that the heat from it was already causing little burn marks in the wood. One of the best aspects about living where I do, high up where I do, is that when you have snow, which is about 6 months of the year, it's a great way to cool off hot metal and bring it back in to begin working back on it. I think it's a good idea to get as much of the grinding and the cutting and the shaping done of the object that you're making before you take the handle off, just in case you need to put it back in the forge. It's nice to leave it on, but I was pretty close to being done with that. I just needed to cut out some of the profile, and then there's a hole that I needed to drill into that, but I didn't need a handle. There's a really cool technique that a lot of blacksmiths use when they're going to forge a blade into a piece of metal, or the edge portion into a piece of metal. I tried to use that here for making the handle. You're basically creating a taco shape. Using that chisel, getting the metal really hot here with my acetylene torch, you're going to open up that piece of metal. I ground it out first. I did a little bit of a cut there, but opening it up so that you can insert the handle afterwards, and then either forge weld it, which I'm terrible at, or actually weld it, which is what I ended up doing. And here you can see both halves of that particular taco shell opening up with the chisel and with a little bit of heating. I don't want to just jam that handle down into there and then weld it. I want it to fit very cleanly, so I had to taper off the edge of this handle that was going to go inside. And as you can see, it looks pretty good. Works, sat right inside there. I'm truly not good enough to forge weld pretty much anything. I don't think I've ever successfully forge welded. So here I am with my little cheap MIG welder, just getting this thing tacked up. And then I did put it in the forge and try to hammer those taco shell leaves, if you will, down onto it. And it worked out real well. I think it's best that we don't even talk about what I was trying to do here. Essentially, there's something about heating the anvil up so that I can kind of forge weld and flatten something and all that stuff, but really it just ended up wasting a lot of acetylene and oxygen. And then I had what I thought was a pretty good idea to make the top half of this cleaver kind of gnarled and look like it sort of fractured in some primordial fire when it was made. So I'm taking the acetylene torch and I'm just heating up that end and melting off the end, and I'm going to put some cuts into it to give it a little bit more of a jagged, crevassed feel to it. It's interesting. I don't know if it came out the way I was thinking that it would. I always thought that cleavers that have that 4-finger hole are just really cool. I don't know if people actually use that much. I think that I would, to be quite honest with you. But that's what I'm drilling here and tapping into that. And I'm going to get that thing wide enough to put a big old fat meaty 4-finger. Hopefully Nick doesn't feel like I'm insulting him by that. But this is at least 1 inch in diameter, probably a little bit more. And now it's time to start profiling and shaping the edge, the actual blade portion. The belt sander that I have is, I think it's a very, very generic one that I bought off of Amazon at some point, but it really does a good job. The grit is very thick and very hardy, and it does remove a lot of material very quickly. It was not expensive to buy, and it was an easy attachment to a bench grinder. It's been worth its weight in gold, to be quite honest with you. I use it all the time. Here, what I'm going to do, I am going to do something that is sort of, I wouldn't call it a trademark of mine. Well, there's my touch mark, ironically. But a lot of the items that I make, I get them red hot, I put a bunch of flux, some borax onto them, and then I will wrap them in a copper wire and put them back in the forge. What that does is it actually leaves a impregnation of copper into the steel, and it is an impregnation. It is not a cladding, it is not a leafing. That copper is deep in that molten steel. Now I'm making those crevasses that I was telling you about and trying to get them a little bit more molten, a little bit more raw, a little bit more primordial looking. And as you'll see here, the final copper impregnation is something to look at. It's really interesting. It's very fascinating. I like it a lot, and like I said, I don't know if it's a trademark of something I do. I've never seen anyone else do it, probably because it's too basic and too easy, but it has a very interesting look to it. Again, this is one of those moments that we probably just shouldn't talk about. I was running out of acetylene gas, so I had to quasi quench that thing. I'm sure it hardened it to some degree, but not at all where it probably needs to be. But as a chopper, it's going to be just fine. I did get this thing quite sharp. I'm using the whetstone here. This is a 1000 grit on the blue side, and then I turned it over and I use 3000 grit. So I did get it pretty darn sharp. And just when I start getting cocky and thinking that I am the world's best craftsman, then I remind myself how bad I actually am when I start using glue or paint or stain. My girls could do a better job of gluing things up than I typically do, at least in terms of mess. Most of my clothing at this point in time was coated with the stuff. Okay, 24 hours have gone by. Let's see what it looks like. I went back and forth on whether I should put pins in the handle, brass pins or rivets, and I decided on this one. This is the first one I've ever decided not to put pins or rivets in it. That wood is just so amazing by itself that as long as that epoxy is good, which it is, I don't need to put anything else in there to secure it. It looks awesome to me. I'm using the Dremel, which I kind of don't like using Dremels at all, but I'm using that to just finish up some final pieces. And here we have painter's tape. I never can understand painter's tape and how the person that actually created it got away with his life. I'm hoping that he didn't. I'm hoping that he was lynched and hung high. And here's the final result. I did not put any oil onto the wood. I didn't want to do anything to dampen the color of that Hollywood, that beautiful white Hollywood. I think Nick is going to like it. I think he's going to be enamored with it. It's going to be under his Christmas tree. So thank you for joining me for that build. That was a lot of fun. As I've said before, it's always really, really rewarding and cathartic and something else when I get to make a project or a gift for somebody that they're not expecting. Especially I get to think about them along the way, my relationship with them, what they mean to me, how they're going to receive the item that I'm sending them. So I'm constantly thinking about what they're going to think when they first see something on the item. And my friend Nick is just one of the best guys you'll ever meet. So he's very well deserving for finally getting something that I have made. The project was pretty straightforward. The build was pretty straightforward. The only things that I learned a couple things in moving that much metal, in terms of using a hammer to move that much metal. I lost all coordination, all dexterity, and all strength after maybe 50 blows of that big heavy hammer, just because I don't use hammers and anvils enough, that my musculature was not ready to take on that load. And so therefore I started getting sloppy, and that can be dangerous, and that can also kind of screw up what you're making. So what I learned is either buy a power hammer or do more blacksmith work, using the hammer more to develop that musculature, or maybe even buy sheet metal, you know, the thickness of the product that I want, and grind out and cut out the shape out of that so that I don't have to move so much, or just suck it up and know that that's how it's going to be, which is probably what I'll end up doing. I also discovered something that I need to change my process on something, and that is that when I'm first heating up that piece of metal to then move it and forge it into what I want it to look like by hammer, there's that moment where I need to heat it up to red hot, and then there's the moment where I infuse the copper to it, then there's the moment moment where I quench it, and then there's the moment where I add my touchmark to it, all of which involve heat. And I did those in 4 separate times, and I think there's even a 5th one that I did, heating that I did in there. There's gotta be a way, and I should think of this, where I can take one moment of heating and do all 4 or 5 of those segments as one, so that I'm not reheating the item up when I come back to it and reheating it up. That can share that same initial heat. I'm not quite certain how to do that yet, but it would be much more efficient, much faster, and use a lot less energy and gas. And then the last thing that I learned on this particular build is something I've already known, which is I and glue or paint or wood stain, whatever you have, we just don't get along. My patience, my cadence doesn't work well. I learned this, I was using epoxy again, that if I'm going to glue 2 pieces together, that's fine. But if I'm gonna glue 3 pieces together, 2 pieces to a third, one of those 3 needs to be clamped down in the vise or in a clamp or held fast somehow. I initially started off with the blade, the handles, the wood pieces, all of that was loose as I was trying to glue them, and it just was a complete you-know-what. I was semi-permanently attached to parts of my clothing after that. Regardless, this will be my last build. I'm gonna take a break for the last 10 days of December and then get back to it in 2024. Merry Christmas, happy holidays from my family to yours. Let's make it a great end of the year, and 2024, here we come. I look forward to that year and sharing my builds with you then. God bless.